The next hour on Trial Story. A riot in Crown Heights, Brooklyn leads to death.
He joined in with that violent crowd, and he took out a knife, and he stabbed Mr. Rosenbaum.
Blacks are pitted against Jews as Lemrick Nelson is tried for murder.
The police framed my client.
From opening statements to the verdict, next on Trial Story, a community torn, a killing in Brooklyn.
You cannot come to grips with the idea that in 1991 in Brooklyn, New York, a person minding their own business can be chased down, attacked amidst cries of "kill the Jew" for no reason at all.
This is a story about a neighborhood. It's a story about Jews and blacks. Deeply religious Jews of the Lubavitch sect and blacks of African and Caribbean descent, both living in a community called Crown Heights in Brooklyn. It's also a story about murder. A murder that happened at the start of 4 days of riots in August 1991. It's one of the most controversial events in recent New York history. On August 19th, a car accident sent shockwaves through Crown Heights. A runaway car veered off the street, jumped onto the sidewalk, and hit 2 children. Angela Cato was seriously injured. Her cousin, 7-year-old Gavin Cato, was killed. The runaway car was part of a motorcade for the leader of the Hasidic Jewish community in Crown Heights. A crowd that had gathered blamed the Jewish driver for the child's death. The crowd was angered when an ambulance from a Jewish volunteer organization took the Jewish driver, but left behind the 2 injured children. A later report by the Crown Heights Coalition said the police had instructed the ambulance to leave because police feared for the driver's safety. Tension grew. Blacks began rioting through the streets of Crown Heights. 3 hours later, a group of rioters attacked and stabbed an Hasidic Jew. The man, Yankel Rosenbaum, a visiting scholar from Australia, later died.
Just about here, he was surrounded by a semicircle of people. Eyewitness accounts number the people about 20 to 30 surrounding him, somewhere around here, and semicircle back, screaming, "Kill the Jew, kill the Jew."
A block away, police caught a 16-year-old high school student, Lemrick Nelson, Jr. Police say they had strong evidence against Nelson. They say they found a bloody knife in his pants pocket. They also say Yankel Rosenbaum, as he lay bleeding on the street, identified Nelson as his attacker. And they say Nelson confessed to police officers that he stabbed Rosenbaum. Police charged him with murder, what some called a racially motivated murder. The trial that resulted was destined to become a symbol of the strains that can be placed on the American jury system by the racial tensions that plague some urban areas. It was still to be seen how this racially sensitive case would be received by jurors from a community both deeply suspicious of the police and possibly aware that the impact of their verdict might touch off a riot. The prosecutors assigned to the case, Sari Kolatch and James Leeper, knew they had a controversial trial on their hands. What they might not have bargained for is the tenacity of the defense.
This is a botched-up situation where they have a scapegoat and they're attempting to get a conviction.
Arthur Lewis was hired to defend Lemrick Nelson. Lewis says his client was framed by police officers, that their evidence was fabricated, and that Nelson was an innocent bystander. Lemrick Nelson's father also is convinced that his son was just part of the crowd.
The crowd went wild. No, the crowd went wild. This is what the crowd was pep up to do, to get somebody to pay for what happened. But the psalmist and the crowd went wild. He said, I was on the sidewalk watching, but at the same time we hear sirens and things coming from different way. He said, I didn't intend to run because I wasn't doing anything, but I just went over the fence and hide behind the bushes is when they come and grab me.
We are demanding justice, right?
To many blacks in Crown Heights, Lemrick Nelson's arrest is more than just a case of mistaken identity. It's about blacks being treated badly by the police and government, and about their white neighbors, wealthier Jewish neighbors, being treated well.
I think we need blacks and whites together on Kingston Avenue. We need to see Louis Farrakhan and people that we respect in our community up on your wall.
The resentment sometimes boils over. Some blacks see Lemrick Nelson's arrest and the fact that the Jewish driver of the runaway car was not prosecuted as symbols of how the system is unfair.
Junior's taking a rap for this, but who's taking a rap for the dead child? Who's taking a rap for the hurt child? No one, because they sat back and they let the man, they let the man leave. But if Junior would have left, they'd have went down there after him, looking for him.
But some from the Jewish community say the system is unfair for them as well, because only one person from the crowd that night is standing trial.
Think for a moment what would happen if a group of 30 Hasidic kids attacked a black in Harlem and screamed, "Kill the black." Can you imagine that a year later only one of them would be apprehended? Within 24 hours they would all be sitting in jail.
While Crown Heights struggles with its racial questions, what is at issue here is this. Does the state have enough evidence to convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that Lemrick Nelson was the man in the crowd who stabbed Yankel Rosenbaum? And will the jury, made up mostly of minorities, be able to put aside its knowledge of police behavior and race relations to reach a fair verdict? In the next hour, you'll have a chance to see the key testimony in this trial and to judge for yourself if the prosecution has proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Lemrick Nelson murdered Yankel Rosenbaum.
The one big word here is credibility. It'll be for the jury to determine who's telling the truth and whether or not the arresting officers and others are telling the truth. Simple.
The officers Arthur Lewis is referring to are police officers. Ultimately, it's the police who are the key to this trial. It's the police testimony the prosecution is relying on, and it is their testimony Lewis must discredit to get his client off. Now, more than a year after the murder in Crown Heights, Lemrick Nelson is set to go to trial. Assistant District Attorney Sari Kolatch addresses the jury.
At 8:30 p.m. on the night of August 19, 1991, there was a tragic and fatal car accident at the corner of Utica Avenue and President Street in Crown Heights. The driver of the car involved in that accident was a Hasidic Jew. The victims were two young black children, one of whom was killed. Immediately after the car accident, protests broke out on the corner of Utica and President. Amid the cries of "no justice, no peace" were also the cries of "let's get a Jew, kill the Jews." The defendant and the group of about 10 to 20 people ended up at the corner of Brooklyn and President. There, the defendant saw someone saying, "There's a Jew, let's get that Jew." The evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that the Jew that the defendant and that crowd saw that night was none other than the Australian tourist, Yankel Rosenbaum. The crowd chased Mr. Rosenbaum, caught him on the corner, and began attacking him. You're going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, through the defendant's own statement that he joined in with that violent mob that was beating Yankel Rosenbaum. Not because he was angered or outraged by the earlier car accident, not because Mr. Rosenbaum was Jewish, but because at that moment, on that night, on that corner, Lemrick Nelson got caught up in the excitement of what was going on. He got caught up in the frenzy of that moment. And he joined in with that violent crowd, and he took out a knife, and he stabbed Mr. Rosenbaum.
Arthur Lewis then begins the defense for Lemrick Nelson.
This case is going to turn on credibility and the truth. I'm going to ask you to look at each and every witness that gets onto the witness stand. Look at them. Listen to them. Observe them for truthfulness. Separate fact from fiction. There's no question Yankel Rosenbaum died. The issue in this case is whether or not my client, Lemrick Nelson, killed Yankel Rosenbaum. The evidence will show that there are other people who are responsible for the death of Yankel Rosenbaum, and that the police framed my client. I'm certain that once you heard all the evidence, that my client will be set free. We'll term him as a victim. And all I want is some justice.
For Arthur Lewis, justice will depend on his success at discrediting the prosecution's key witnesses. He'll have to create doubt, reasonable doubt, that this teenager stabbed Yankel Rosenbaum to death. When we return, the state calls its first witness, and later, the verdict.
We now return to a community torn, a killing in Brooklyn.
What they did here was chipped away, and those pieces of concrete in which his blood was had fallen, was buried with him.
This is Norman Rosenbaum, Yankel Rosenbaum's older brother. He's explaining that the blood shed when his brother was murdered has been chiseled from the sidewalk and buried with him.
He was being pursued because he was Jewish, and I mean, this is something straight out of, you know, World War II Germany. This is just reminiscent of the Holocaust, classic anti-Semitism.
Norman Rosenbaum has had happier times, like here, when his brother Yankel attended his wedding. The Rosenbaum brothers were raised as Hasidic Jews in Australia. Yankel, a Jewish scholar, came to the United States to do research for his doctoral thesis. He was 29 when he was killed.
Such a disgusting thing to pick on the helpless. I mean, from the point of view unarmed, outnumbered. I mean, it's a cowardly act.
It's time for prosecutors to lay out their case. The key will be testimony of the police officers who investigated the incident. Officer Leonard Milazzo and his partner were the first police at the scene. Prosecutor James Leeper questions the witness.
What exactly were the group of 10 to 15 people doing at that time?
I could see people kicking and punching, and in particular there was one male which was crouched over him.
Can you describe this person who you saw who was crouching and behind the man who was on the ground?
What I could see was that he was a male black teenager. He was wearing a red shirt.
All right. Was he wearing anything on his head at that time?
A cap.
What kind of cap, if you could
Like
tell?
a baseball cap.
And do you recall what, if anything, this individual with the red shirt and the cap who was crouched over this man, what he was doing, if anything?
It looked to me as if he was hitting him.
With his hands?
Yes.
Could you see if he had anything in his hands at that time?
I couldn't tell at that point.
Do you remember what type of shirt Cleon Taylor was wearing at the time? I mean, Lemrick Nelson was wearing at the time he arrived at the emergency room?
Red colored shirt.
Did you recognize Lemrick Nelson from the scene of President in Brooklyn where Rosenbaum was assaulted?
I could not positively identify him.
Well, how did he compare in terms of height to the individual that you'd seen in the red shirt at the intersection of Brooklyn and President?
Very close in height.
What about weight?
His whole in stature, height and weight, age.
But you were not sure that was the same individual?
I could not be sure.
Although Officer Milazzo does testify that Nelson looks like the teenager he saw attacking Rosenbaum, his uncertainty highlights a weakness in the prosecution's case. It's the closest the prosecution gets to eyewitness testimony identifying Nelson at the scene of the stabbing. On cross-examination, defense attorney Arthur Lewis does not challenge Milazzo's testimony about Nelson. Instead, he tries to discredit the officer by questioning him about another man who was arrested that night for the stabbing.
You indicate on that report that Cleon Taylor assaulted Yankel Rosenbaum?
That was prior to, yes, that's what I state on the report.
So when you stated on the report, that was another mistake, is that correct?
Yes.
You prepared this? You
Yes.
stated it already. Did you state at time and place of occurrence, did observe perp number 1, that's Cleon Taylor, is that correct?
Yes.
In group of 10, male blacks kicking, punching victim, lying on ground?
Yes.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, as I will charge you with the other case, It's up to you to see if there's an inconsistency between his in-court testimony and his reports, and what significance of any of that.
Does this inconsistency show that Officer Milazzo is lying? That's what Lewis wants the jury to believe.
You solemnly swear that the testimony you are to give this case on trial will be the truth, the whole truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated.
The focus of the prosecution's case then shifts to when Lemrick Nelson was caught. Police officer Mark Hoppe found Nelson hiding 1 block from the stabbing and began to frisk him. Prosecutor Sari Kolatch questions him.
And did you recover anything?
Yes, I did.
What did you recover?
A knife.
Can you describe the knife for us?
A black-handled folding knife, which appeared to be stained with blood.
Where did you see what you thought was blood?
On a portion of the blade that was visible when it was closed.
When the knife was closed, a portion of the blade was visible?
Yes.
Did you know what was visible? Blade, a portion of the blade. Did you note anything else about the knife?
Yes.
What else?
It had the word killer written in like red paint.
Where was the word written?
On the handle.
When you recovered the knife, what'd you do with it?
I showed it to my partner.
Okay, at that time, had other police officers arrived at the scene?
Yes.
Where were they?
On the other side of the fence on the Union Street side.
What happened when you arrived at the scene, when you came to that corner with Lemrick Nelson?
I walked in front of Mr. Rosenbaum with Mr. Nelson.
And what did you do? What happened?
I observed Mr. Rosenbaum attempt to get up on his elbows. He looked directly at Mr. Nelson and said, "Why did you stab me?"
That testimony is obviously damaging to the defense. Not only does Officer Hoppe establish that Yankel Rosenbaum identified Nelson as his attacker, he also testifies about finding a bloody knife in Nelson's pocket. But on cross-examination, Arthur Lewis tries to plant seeds of doubt about this story.
Is there any blood stains around the pocket itself?
They appear to be bloodstains, yes.
Where?
Here.
Those are blood stains?
They appear to be bloodstains.
Any blood stains on the pocket itself that you pulled out?
You mean?
Yeah.
There appears to be a small stain right here.
Small blood stain?
Yes.
This is the small blood stain?
Yes.
Defense attorney Lewis's point. Why wasn't there more blood in Nelson's pocket if in fact police did find the knife there? Meanwhile, prosecutors called other witnesses, all police officers, who testified that Yankel Rosenbaum identified Lemrick Nelson as the attacker. One of those witnesses was Sergeant Brian Wilson.
What happened at that time?
I asked Mr. Rosenbaum if he recognized Lemrick Nelson.
What, if anything, did Yankel Rosenbaum do at the time that you asked that question?
Pushed himself off the hood of the car and looked at Lemrick Nelson.
Did he say anything at that time?
Yes, he said he's one of them, the red shirt. I remember the red shirt.
And did he say anything else at that particular moment?
No.
What happened then?
Mr. Rosenbaum had pushed himself off the hood of the car and had spit at Mr. Nelson and said, "Why did you stab me?"
And when you say he spit, could you tell what came out of his mouth at that time?
Appeared to be a wad of blood.
For the prosecution, this is important. Sergeant Wilson reinforces earlier testimony about the identification.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
But on cross-examination, defense attorney Lewis tries to show that the identification is not believable. First, he focuses on Nelson's appearance.
When you first saw Lemrick Nelson, did he have a hat on?
Yes, sir.
He had a hat on his head?
Yes, sir. Lemrick Nelson, yes, he did.
Did he have a hat on his head when he was shown to Yankel Rosenbaum?
No, the hat was taken off his head.
Did you take that hat off?
No.
Who took the hat off?
Officer Hoppe did.
Did Lemrick Nelson look different with his hat off, thus invalidating the identification? Lewis then questions Sergeant Wilson about whether Rosenbaum might have seen the knife first and then identified Nelson as his attacker because the presence of the bloody knife suggested it.
After you were shown this knife? After you were shown this knife?
Yes, sir.
You?
Yes.
did Mr. Rosenbaum spat this glob of blood at Lemrick Nelson?
When Officer Hoppe showed me the knife?
After you saw the knife, did the spitting take place before you were shown the knife or after you were shown the knife, or perhaps while you were shown the knife?
After I had seen the knife.
He spat at him, is that correct?
Yes.
A glob of blood?
Appeared to be blood, yes.
And then he said, what did he say after he spat?
He said, why did you stab me?
That was after he spat at him, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And after you had seen this knife, you had seen this knife.
After I had seen the knife, yes.
Were you next to the car?
I was next to the car.
How far were you from Rosenbaum at the time the knife was shown?
3 feet. About 3 feet.
Did Rosenbaum see the knife? Defense attorney Arthur Lewis is implying that if he did, this could have influenced, thus tainted, his identification of Nelson. For Nelson, this is key to his defense. His lawyer is challenging some powerful prosecution testimony. Testimony that a dying man identified Nelson as his attacker. Will the jury believe this? When we return, a key witness gives surprising testimony. And later, the verdict.
We now return to a community torn, a killing in Brooklyn.
Between them, prosecutors Sari Kolatch and James Leeper have tried 50 murder cases, and they're presenting what many observers of the trial consider a strong case.
Just come right up and have a seat on the witness stand.
Leeper calls transit officer Robert Lewis to the stand. He testifies about searching Lemrick Nelson.
Did both of you search him?
Yes, we did.
Both you and
Both
officer?
searched.
Both searched, yes.
And during this search, was anything recovered?
Yeah, a knife.
All right. Who recovered the knife?
Officer Hoppe.
All right. And do you recall where he recovered this knife from?
In his right front pocket.
Who's right?
This testimony supports Officer Hoppe's version of events on a key point, that the alleged murder weapon was taken from Nelson's pocket. But then, surprisingly, while still on direct examination, Officer Lewis throws a wrench into the prosecution's case.
Let me ask you this, officer. Once that knife was recovered by Officer Hoppe, what was done next with regard to that knife?
Officer Hoppe gave me the knife. I opened the knife.
Okay. And what if it...
Wait a second. Slow up. Hoppe handed you the knife?
Yeah.
Now let me ask you, I just want to know where everybody's position. While all this is going on, where Hoppe hands you the knife, you open it up, hand it then to Police Officer Whaler, you and Hoppe are in the yard together?
Yes, sir.
I would assume that Police Officer Hoppe was looking at you when he handed you the knife.
Yes, he did.
I mean, he didn't do it like...
No, we was right side by side.
Where was the defendant while all this was going on?
He was still on the ground.
Now, there's another officer whose name you now know, right? Police Officer Marino?
Yeah, he was on the other side of the fence with Officer Wheeler.
How close was he to Wheeler while this was happening?
We was all right there, Judge.
Before?
Right there.
Continue.
Now, at that...
I'll tell you this. The court wants Hoppe and Marino back here on Monday. You follow me? I want them back.
What the judge is angry about is a blatant contradiction. Officer Lewis has testified that he helped Officer Hoppe in the search and that Hoppe passed him the knife. But Hoppe had testified that he searched Lemrick Nelson alone. While the contradiction is notable, such an outburst by a judge before a jury is highly unusual, and it could help the defense. On cross-examination, Arthur Lewis implies that Hoppe and other officers had a motive to lie.
Are you aware of the fact that these 4 officers all got commendations for their involvement in this arrest?
Objection. Sustained. Well, is he aware of it? No, I changed my ruling. Overruled. Do you know that they got a commendation?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Did you get any official recognition?
No.
Did you make an application for such?
No, I didn't, sir.
And you were used again, right? No further questions.
Objection. Sustained. I don't even know what that wasn't even a question, and I want you to disregard it.
Even though the judge told the jury to disregard Arthur Lewis's comment, the defense lawyer raised the issue. Did Officer Hoppe lie? Is his testimony believable?
Yeah, but remain standing, face your please, and leave it right now.
The next witness, Detective Edward Brown, is crucial for the prosecution's case. He's one of two detectives who testifies that Lemrick Nelson confessed to stabbing Rosenbaum. He testifies that Nelson gave up his Miranda rights, his right to remain silent, and his right to have an attorney present, and then told him what happened.
Mr. Nelson said that and this is his word, he was chilling in front of 455 Schenectady Avenue, where his girlfriend Conda lived. And he was drinking a 40-ounce beer. He saw a bunch of ambulances going towards Kings County Hospital, and he decided to make an inquiry. He approached the policewoman, he asked her what happened, and she said that a Jewish guy had hit a black kid with a car. At President in Brooklyn, he encountered a crowd. In the crowd, somebody chanted, "There's a Jew, let's get the Jew." The crowd chased, and Mr. Nelson joined them. I asked Mr. Nelson then, did he chase the Jew because he was in fact a Jew? And he said no. I was very excited, and I was a little high from the beer. He said the crowd caught up to Mr. Rosenbaum, and they started hitting him. He said he then took out his knife, and he cut him once in the left side. I said, what happened then? He said that he saw the cops coming, and he ran, and the cops grabbed him at Brooklyn and Union Street. I said, what happened then? He said, the cop took the knife out of my pocket. I asked him, what happened then? He said, the cop brought me back, and the Jew said that I was the one who stabbed him.
For Lemrick Nelson, this testimony, if believed, is clearly damaging. But on cross-examination by defense attorney Arthur Lewis, Detective Brown acknowledges he did not take notes during the confession.
All these words here, words exactly used and told to you by Mr. Nelson?
It's not verbatim.
It's not verbatim?
It says it on the report.
Well, let me ask you a little question. Did you ask him to sign any writings?
Not at that time.
At any time?
Yes.
What did he take?
No.
Arthur Lewis then introduces a videotape that shows Nelson refusing to make any statement at all.
What is your name, please?
Lemrick Nelson.
My name is Quentin Moore. I'm an assistant district attorney. I'm investigating an incident which occurred at Brooklyn Avenue and President Street. I have reason to believe that you were involved. I would like to speak to you about this incident, but before I talk to you, I want to be certain that you understand your rights under the law. You have the right to remain silent. That is, you do not have to speak to me or answer any of my questions. You understand what I have just said?
Yes.
Now that you have been advised of your rights, do you want to speak to me at this time?
No.
Lewis hopes the jury will contrast the tape with Detective Brown's testimony and will conclude that Brown lied and that Nelson never made a confession. The prosecution next relies on medical experts to try to prove Lemrick Nelson's guilt. One was Dr. David Bing.
Based on your testing, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to why Rosenbaum could have been the source of that knife stain?
Yes, he is not excluded as the source of that DNA isolated from that knife stain.
Okay, and if he's not excluded, then he is included within the segment of the population who could have deposited that knife stain?
That is correct.
While there was not enough blood to do an exact identification, Dr. Bing testifies that the blood from the knife could have been Yankel Rosenbaum's. Earlier in the trial, the same conclusions were reached for blood found on Nelson's pants and on money found in Nelson's pocket. Experts also testified the blood was definitely not Lemrick Nelson's. But on cross-examination, Arthur Lewis makes the accusation that the investigation was sloppy, leading to inconclusive results.
And you found something on his knife. Is that right? Yes or no?
We did not test the knife. We tested swabs that were taken from...
You didn't test the knife?
The knife was not sent to us.
Oh. And you tested what's supposed to be some swabs from this knife, is that right?
That is correct.
Oh, well, let's don't go any further. Now, all this talk, assuming that this was Yankel Rosenbaum's blood on any of that material, this assuming, we really don't have any scientific evidence that that's Yankel Rosenbaum's blood, do we?
I have no evidence that that
No
was...
further questions, just wasting time.
You want to finish his answer, please? No. Oh, geez, I just don't understand what's happened to courtesy in the courtroom. Go ahead.
I said that I have no scientific certainty that that is Yankel Rosenbaum's blood.
Arthur Lewis made the point with great drama that the blood tests were inconclusive, that Dr. Bing could not say for certain that the blood on the knife was Yankel Rosenbaum's.
All right, do you have another witness to call? Or where are we?
This time the people rest.
Okay.
Prosecutors rest their case, having relied almost exclusively on police and expert testimony. But they were not able to produce a single witness from the crowd of angry blacks on the street that night to testify that Lemrick Nelson killed Yankel Rosenbaum. That's a weakness the defense will try to exploit when we return. Lemrick Nelson has never been in trouble with the law before this case. He's lived his whole life, 17 years, in Brooklyn, most recently in this apartment in Crown Heights with his father. Like many in Crown Heights, Nelson's family is from the Caribbean, Trinidad. His father, a retired baker who raised his son alone, carries the accent.
A person is scared, especially my son. He never get locked up before. He never get arrested before. You know what I mean? He's scared to fight because he's scared to get hurt.
Lemrick Nelson Sr. has come to court every day to be by his son's side during the trial. He's used his savings to hire his son a lawyer.
So we're at
606.
And that lawyer turned out to be a fighter. Arthur Lewis has staked much of his case on trying to discredit the prosecution's witnesses. Often he uses a highly combative style on cross-examination. Here are a few examples.
Did I have to charge you with framing?
Excuse me?
I said I have to charge you with framing my client.
Disregard that. That's not even a question. You got to ask questions. You're an attorney. You could say these things in summation. You can't stay in the court. That's something they do on television, not in the courtroom. Please, Mr. Lewis.
Did any detective come up to you and tell you that this arrest is shit and it don't belong in the station house?
Jackson. Overruled. I don't know. Maybe someone did tell us. Anybody tell you that?
No, Your Honor.
Lewis's style also leads to battles with the judge.
I'm not going to argue. The objection is sustained. Continue. Lay a foundation. If there's a proper foundation, it goes in. If it's not a legally proper foundation, it stays out. I can't try the case.
I beg pardon?
Go ahead. Next question.
Can we approach?
No.
Listen.
I said no.
I said listen.
I said don't.
Okay, look.
I told you ask your next question or sit down. One or the other.
Well,
no, don't
I'm not
get
going to
that.
that.
I'm telling you right now to ask your next question.
Lewis did not shy away from these confrontations, but they subsided as the trial went on. As the defense begins its case, Lewis does something the prosecution did not do. He calls eyewitnesses who were in or near the crowd that night. John Anderson gives surprise testimony about events just before the stabbing.
This Hasidic man that was in the car, did you later learn him to be Yankel Rosenbaum?
Yes.
What, if anything, occurred?
Well, after he got out the car, he said something to one of the youths that was with us, and then he threw a kick. Then when he threw a kick, the kid caught his foot and then hit him against the fence.
Who got hit against the fence?
Yankel.
Then what occurred?
Then the guy who hit him and 3 others commenced on hitting him.
When you say hitting him, you mean hitting Yankel Rosenbaum?
Yes.
Was Yankel Rosenbaum knocked to the pavement?
No.
It's your testimony here today that Yankel Rosenbaum exited the car and threw a kick at a youth.
Yes.
Overruled. No. That's your testimony, right?
Yes.
John Anderson is the first witness in the trial to say that Yankel Rosenbaum was the aggressor, that he started a fight, resulted in him being stabbed. But later, another eyewitness, called by the defense, contradicts Anderson while under cross-examination.
At any time, did you see Yankel Rosenbaum go up to that group and try to kick them?
No, no.
So he was walking across President Street at that point?
Yes.
And what is it that you heard, if anything, from the crowd of Jews that was on the opposite side of President Street?
There's a Jew. Get a Jew. Get the Jew.
And did they come towards Yankel Rosenbaum at that point?
Yes.
And you say they physically abused him at that time?
Yes.
So I take it they attacked him?
They attacked him, yes.
Chaya Popack was one of several defense witnesses who appeared to help the prosecution. Prosecutors are perplexed by how Arthur Lewis is handling his case.
You know, this guy's bizarre in terms of the way he tries a case. It's just amazing to me that he can do this kind of thing. I mean, we talk about throwing stuff up against the wall hoping it sticks. That's really what he's doing. And some of it is not sticking.
Whether it's sticking will ultimately be determined by the jury. Meanwhile, Arthur Lewis moves forward with his case. So far, jurors have heard little about Lemrick Nelson as a person, but his character and temperament could be important.
When school is in session, how often would you see Lemrick Nelson, if at all?
Several times a day.
So you're quite familiar with him?
Yes.
Nancy Casell runs the special education program at Lemrick Nelson's high school.
Has he a record for being in fights with other students?
No.
Objection.
1 second. That's overruled. Has he been in fights with us students?
No.
To your knowledge, anyway.
I would know that every fight would come to me.
Defense attorney Lewis asks her about Nelson's comprehension level.
Seriously, below what is expected for someone his age.
How far below?
About 5 years.
He's now 17, and he has a comprehension of about 12 years old?
Yes.
Well, you don't know what's happened with him the last year. You haven't seen him.
No.
But when you seen him, what was his comprehension level?
About equivalent to about an average 12-year-old child.
The implied question, was Lemrick Nelson smart enough? Was he able to fully understand that he gave up his Miranda rights before his alleged confession? But on cross-examination, prosecutor James Leeper returns to the issue of Nelson's temperament.
Okay, could you read that out loud as to the reason why this consideration was given?
Okay, Lemrick is not able to sit still. He has a very brief attention span and is extremely disruptive in class. Lemrick will not follow rules and is defiant to authority. He likes to spend his day with his hat on, walking in and out of the class, throwing paper into other classrooms. Okay, Lemrick will become violently angry when reprimanded to the point of shoving people out of the way or crying. He does not see a reason for rules. He prefers to make his own.
The defense has now called all of its witnesses, but the prosecution gets one last chance. It wants to refute Nancy Casell's testimony that Lemrick Nelson might not have understood his Miranda rights. Now, this issue is crucial because, according to the law, if the jury believes that he confessed but did not understand his rights, the jury must ignore the confession.
Raise your right hand, please.
The prosecution calls Dr. Sanford Drob, while Nancy Casell testified that Lemrick Nelson has an IQ of 84. Dr. Drob says Nelson is smarter, with an IQ of 100.
Let me ask you, in your experience, Dr. Drob, does an IQ level of 100, or we also have a finding in the records of 84, in and of itself demonstrate an impaired ability to comprehend Miranda warnings?
Not at all. Individuals with an 84 or even an 80 IQ frequently have perfect comprehension of the Miranda warnings and actually can be assumed to have that comprehension.
Did Lemrick Nelson comprehend the Miranda warning? What's at stake is how the jury will weigh the confession. The trial is now nearing its end. When we return, the verdict.
And now the conclusion of A Community Torn, a killing in Brooklyn.
The trial of Lemrick Nelson, a trial that has received intense attention in New York, is about to come to an end. Lemrick Nelson will soon know, after spending more than a year in jail awaiting trial, whether he's free to go home or whether he will go to prison. Arthur Lewis gives his closing argument.
the prosecution would want to believe this is an open and shut case. Nothing of the sort. They'd want to believe that they caught my client with a smoking gun. Nothing of the sort. This case couldn't have been messier if they intended it to be. What they're going to say, well, if it was packed, if we were manufacturing the case, would it have been better? It should have been better. But these people in their arrogance and their high-handedness didn't feel that it had to be any better than what it was. And what they felt was merely an assault escalated to a homicide, and you got some damn dumb cops. Now I'll tell you this. They talk about the gang that couldn't shoot straight. You got a bunch of cops that can't even lie straight.
Mr. Lewis has stood up here and outright accused the police officers of lying. Now let's face it, folks, there are inconsistencies in this case. Now, if they're lying, you wouldn't have it. When people are going to get together and tell a lie for the sole purpose of framing someone for a crime they didn't commit, for pinning something on them, when they get together and tell a lie, they make sure that there are no inconsistencies because they don't need to rely on their memories. They get together, they make up a nice, neat, simple little story, and that's it. It's only when people are relying on their memories, on what they recall occurring, that you're going to get these inconsistencies. When the defendant took his knife out of his pocket and unfolded it and joined together with that crowd and plunged that knife into Yankel Rosenbaum's body, he was accepting responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, not only for his own actions, but for the actions of the people he was acting together with. And there can be no question in your mind what his intent was when he opens that knife and plunges it into another human life.
After 17 days of trial, the judge sends the case to the jury. It's now up to the jury to decide if the prosecution has proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Lemrick Nelson stabbed Yankel Rosenbaum. If the jurors find the prosecution proved its case, they must find Lemrick Nelson guilty of murder or manslaughter, punishable by up to life in prison. If jurors are not convinced by the evidence, they must acquit him.
My son is innocent, and I believe that the jury is becoming not guilty as far as this situation is concerned.
He identified Lemrick Nelson. Lemrick Nelson made a confession. Now the fact is, all of these things put together, I would say, leave to any thinking person a clear picture of what occurred that night, that Lemrick Nelson stabbed my brother.
We have you! In the sun! No. In the sun!
From the start of deliberations, tensions are high.
Federal intervention now! Federal intervention now!
Deliberations continue for 4 seemingly long days.
So can the two alternates move down towards the end, please?
On the 4th day, the jury reaches a verdict.
Mr. Foreman, has the jury agreed upon unanimous verdict?
Your Honor, we have.
Under the first count of the indictment, charging the defendant Lemrick Nelson under indictment 10358 of 1991 with the crime of murder in the second degree intentional, what is your verdict?
Not guilty.
Under 1B, murder in the second degree depraved indifference, what is your verdict?
Not guilty.
Under the third count, manslaughter in the first degree, what is your verdict?
Not guilty.
Under the fourth count, manslaughter in the second degree, what is your verdict?
Not guilty.
You may be seated, sir. Members of the jury, hear your verdict as it stands recorded. You and each of you say you find the defendant not guilty of all charges. I ask you collectively, is that your verdict?
Yes.
Lemrick Nelson has been acquitted. He's free to go home.
It's a victory for all of New York, and certainly a victory for our state justice system.
I hope this is a step towards healing whatever rift's supposed to be between the two communities.
We want justice! A Jew was killed!
But the Jewish community of Crown Heights is outraged. Some accuse the jury, composed mostly of minorities, of being racist and anti-Semitic.
This is a blatant miscarriage of justice. He identified his killer, and that's not enough in this city.
But the jurors come forward to defend their verdict. They deny that race played any part in the verdict.
It was no racist decision by far. Race had nothing to do with it. As a matter of fact, one of the white jurors was the most adamant about not guilty.
We based our opinion on the evidence and the law, and that's it. If there was something else that they wanted us to base it on, they should have let us know.
These two jurors agreed to speak to Court TV under the agreement that they would not be identified.
We wanted to make sure that justice was served. We had times when we were arguing to the point of, I'm not going to say we came to physical blows, but it was almost at the point where we would choke each other. As a joke, we were saying that's why the judge wouldn't allow us to have the knife in the room with us.
Jurors say they found contradictions in the police testimony just too glaring and thus not believable. One juror said she believes it's possible the police outright framed Lemrick Nelson.
Possibly they couldn't, could have, possibly they couldn't have. It's hard to tell. There are a whole series of reasons why they might have, a whole series why they might not have. The precinct might have wanted to bring someone to justice quickly for the crime that was committed. I can understand that, but when you're talking about bringing someone to justice, it's my belief that you should at least have the correct evidence.
The jury's suspicion of the police goes a long way to explaining how the defense was able to overcome what could be considered very convincing testimony. That the murder weapon was found in Lemrick Nelson's pocket, that Yankel Rosenbaum identified Nelson as his attacker, and that Nelson confessed to the crime. But a jury must be convinced of the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And amid their suspicions of the police testimony, this jury was not convinced.
He's discharged.
As for Lemrick Nelson, he is now a free man. But even as he walks free, at least one juror is not entirely sure that Lemrick Nelson is an innocent man.
Possibly he is, possibly he isn't. I can't say. There was no evidence proving to me otherwise. He's believed innocent until proven guilty. He has to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and the key word is beyond. Otherwise, he's to be given the benefit of the doubt because he is innocent until proven otherwise.
For Court TV, I'm Fred Graham.